Okay, my name is William Blom, B-L-O-M. It's been pronounced every way you can think of, but it's Blom. The position I held with CSEA for 30 years was Director of Research. It was very interesting back then, back in 1962. The hiring was a lot different than it is now. You had a final interview, and it was with people that were pretty high up in the organization and the law firm that was retained. I had an interview back in, well, it used to be Keeler's Restaurant down on State Street in Troy. And I live in Troy, excuse me, in Albany. And I was interviewed by Joe Feely, who was president of CSEA at the time, and Joe Lochner, the executive director, John DeGraff, who was one of the partners in the law firm retained, DeGraff, Foy, Conway, and Holt Harris, and Henry Galpin, who was the research analyst at the time, salary research analyst. It was very interesting, and I guess I was a little bit naive. I had just gotten a degree from the University of Michigan in statistics, master's degree. And when they asked the questions and so forth, I remember saying to them, well, is there going to be a chance for some real research? Can we do some things that would be important, you know, as I view it, to the membership that haven't been done before? And everybody kind of chuckled. You know, they started to laugh, and then somebody said, sure. And I thought to myself, uh-oh, something's different here, something's wrong. And I found out why, because all your time was taking up doing the things that had to be done for the membership in terms of solving problems. And there wasn't any time for doing statistical type research, you know, on any topic that might be of interest or need to the members. So that's the beginning. I liked the job very much. It's been a job that is so complex that you never know what the problem is going to be from one day to the next. And that made it very interesting. You get to be knowledgeable in civil service law and local procedures, and then talking with groups of people on the management side as well as on the CSEA side. And I enjoyed it very much.
Now, you mentioned a lot of the people that you worked with, like you first met, like Joe Feely. Give us some recollections about the people, the personalities, how they interacted with people.
Oh, okay. Well, Joe Feely was the president of CSEA at the time. At that time, it wasn't a full-time job. It was a part-time job. And he worked for the state tax department up on the state campus. And there was a telephone connection that when his phone rang up there, it also rang on the president's desk here, so he didn't miss, you know, any calls, so to speak. He had a secretary here, and he'd come down to CSEA usually after work or about 3 o'clock. So you had, except in special occasions, so you really had to be around to know what his thoughts were and what he would like to have done. It used to be, we used to kid about the day starting at 5:30 in the afternoon. But usually there'd be a few of us that would congregate in his office, and we'd discuss the problems and so forth. Joe was, I would say, a rather easygoing person. He was a nice person to work with and for, and everybody seemed to get along pretty well with Joe. Now, the executive director, Joseph Lochner, was kind of a fireball. I mean, he had his nose into everything, so to speak. He was called Mr. CSEA because of all his years with the organization. He was with CSEA long before I was, when they started with a little office over in the state capitol. And that's where it all began, I guess. And when I started, we were at 8 Elk Street down the road down here. So Joe, you know, he could sit and talk for hours and talk about everything that happened all the way back. And it's too bad that he passed on, because if he were here today, I'm sure you'd have 3 notebooks full, you know, and so forth. But he was okay to work with, but he was, like I said, kind of a fireball. You know, if you didn't do something the way he felt, man. But that's needed. So he was very effective, I think, as an executive director. The law firm, DeGraff, Foy, Conway, and Holt Harris, was retained by CSEA. There were no in-house lawyers like there are now. And that made it very interesting, too. The first one that I remember working with assigned to us from the law firm on the retainer was an individual by the name of Harry Albright. Now he handled it pretty well. And he had an office upstairs in the CSEA building, and he came over probably about half of each day or mid-afternoon or whatever. And the attorneys always represented us over with the politicians usually, attorney and the president would go over, and sometimes some staff would go. And back then it was most interesting because there was no Taylor law, no negotiations, nothing that would force the state to sit down and talk to you even. But CSEA had developed a relationship whereby we had regular conferences with the budget director of the state. At that time, when I started, it was Dr. T. Norman Hurd, and his deputy budget director was a man by the name of Al Marshall. And we did most of the business with the two of them. Now, they didn't have to listen, but throughout many administrations, political administrations, they listened because they knew that we had our finger on some of the problems that they might not be aware of. What's causing unrest among the employees? How are we doing with respect to salaries? Well, they had research too, and they knew. But we'd point out to them how there were inequities in terms of job titles and salary allocations that went with the job titles. And they listened, but they didn't have to give us anything, so to speak. But it usually worked out where they would tell us what they were going to do as a result of what we said and what they weren't going to do. And we did a pretty good job, I think, for the membership that way, pre-Taylor law times.
Now, how did you get the research? How did you go about getting the research from the membership? Like, what the inequities?
Well, a lot of it came from the annual convention, delegate meeting, if you will. Research usually had a booth, as did other places like the communications department. And we were available throughout the entire meeting. And if we would tell them what research is responsible for, and if they had any problems, any of the delegates, they could come to us and we'd sit down and talk to them about it. And if it was something we had to take back and find out more about, we'd do that and then give them a report. And if they had any members that they wanted to meet with us, they'd just tell the membership that we're available. Here's the telephone number. Make your arrangements. If you want to meet and discuss a problem that you think the research department can help you with, feel free. And we were very happy to do that. And that we got a lot of our information that way.
So it was face-to-face?
Yeah, face-to-face, a lot of it. And a lot of it was in writing, you get
do surveys?
complaints. Yeah, we did a few surveys. We weren't staffed highly. When I started, there was myself, an assistant director. I think they changed the name to that. Got a director and an assistant director with nobody under you, We had an assistant director named Tom Coyle, and we had a secretary. That and all the research files were in a little room down at 8 Elk Street. And it wasn't much room, wasn't much space at all. So as time went on, we were able to hire a research assistant. So he got stuck in that little room too. He had less room to breathe. But that's how it started, and it worked up from there to a maximum. When I left, I think I had, including a budget analyst analyzing state and local budgets, a maximum of probably 8 or 9 people. So we managed fairly well on what we had. And of course, back then, CSEA was pretty much an organization for state employees. There weren't any locals, counties, political subdivisions of any kind, cities, towns, villages, school districts. And that all built up in that 30-year period. I developed a county division to go along with the state division. And it became very active, and after a while, toward the end of my time with the organization, county division numbered as many, if not more, than the state division. They did number more. And that got a little more difficult because then you got involved in, now I'm talking post-Taylor law, you got involved in representing them, and they'd send their demands to you, and you would have to develop the supporting information for their demands so it could be used in local negotiations. Sometimes we'd be required to go and sit down at the table and make a presentation on salaries or fringe benefits or civil service law rules and regulations, which we had to know fairly well. So that became as I said, a very interesting part of the job because you learned a lot. Now, let's see. We had the state negotiating units that were set up with the Taylor Law, namely the administrative unit, institutional unit, technical services unit, I think that was called operational services unit, and the administrative services unit, which were the clerical people. And we had to negotiate with the state on behalf of each unit. There was a part of the contract that was applicable to all, so you negotiated that, for all of them, and then you had individual problems within each unit that you had to negotiate. And that took a lot of time, and again, was very interesting, and you'd have side meetings with the state to see what kind of data, they would look for and what we could develop, and it developed a good working relationship with the state of New York, after the Taylor Law. And the state would also designate certain jobs. The beginning, it was from existing jobs. After that, it got to be new jobs they set up, designate them as in the management confidential category, which means they couldn't be represented by any union. So what we had to do then was we'd get the list from the state, look at the job titles, look at the duty descriptions, and try to determine based on criteria established by Governor's Office of Employee Relations in conjunction with the Public Employee Relations Board, PERB, whether or not we really felt that these jobs should be excluded from collective bargaining and be in the management confidential group. And that got very interesting too, because you talked to GO, Governor's Office of Employee Relations, GOER, about it. If you couldn't settle it with them, then you went to a hearing at the Public Employment Relations Board, and that was like a judicial setting. You made your arguments and so forth and so on. And we were, I would say, fairly successful in doing that.
Now, who was governor when you started with CSEA?
I think it was Rockefeller.
Rockefeller.
Yeah, I was here for Rockefeller, Harriman, Carey, Malcolm Wilson. I may not have them in the right order, but
No, that's all right.
and of course Cuomo.
Yeah.
And that.
Now, did you meet with any of them?
Oh yeah,
Give us your
I have some.
personal recollection.
I have some pictures of the whole CSEA group with like Rockefeller in the middle and so forth. Well, generally speaking, somebody like me with my place in the organization wasn't permitted or didn't have too much to say. But Rockefeller was generally, I would say, a friend of state employees, probably on a comparative basis. My guess would be we got more for state employees during the Rockefeller years than at any other time. And you could meet with, we met with him quite a bit and discussed things. I mean, an entire group. And the same thing happened with the other governors. And it got interesting. You got to see how they acted and handled themselves and whether they wanted to be involved or didn't want to be involved, A couple of them, I'm not going to mention names, would just as soon stay out of it. I've got my people here, you talk to them. But then the people that represented the governor would say, well, he has the final decision, so you're getting the runaround, but it worked out all right in the end.
So the biggest change was probably under Rockefeller when the Taylor Law came in, right? I mean, for you.
Yeah, the Taylor Law made a big change
Tell us
because,
about before and after.
well,
during,
I kind of hinted at
Yeah,
it.
you did.
Before, there was no require to sit down with any representatives of state or local government employees. If they did so, they considered it out of the goodness of their hearts, the local people and the state people. And we had conferences with the state, as I had indicated, and the budget director's office, and so-called, quote-unquote, negotiations, which were not true negotiations because we didn't have the Taylor Law, which required them to sit down and talk to you and to do certain things. In the political subdivisions, when they became part of the organization, you had, again, I didn't mention this, but back when I started, the field staff, they were called field representatives, not collective bargaining specialists. And I think there were 6 or 8 for the whole state. And that's all we had. And so you had to help a lot more You know, a lot of them now do it on their own. They do their own collection of data and find out things from here and there and use that information. That is when I left. We were still involved in helping them with fact-finding before whatever government agency had to appear for the fact-finding. We'd present the data on salaries, fringe benefits, like I said, civil service law, and local management confidential designations also. And it changed when the Taylor Law came in because that's what they had to do. I mean, it was an unfair labor practice not to talk, you know. And that made a big difference because at least you felt as though what you're doing, somebody's going to listen to it and really listen to it. And they did. Of course, most of the time they didn't agree, but that's how that's what made the world go round as far as labor negotiations are concerned.
So you were there pretty much for all the major issues in CSEA.
Yeah, I think I was.
Can you enumerate on them? Tell us what they were, the people involved, how things were handled.
Let me get a drink.
Yeah, go ahead. Take a break.
I'm gonna stop tape for just a second here.
Troy, or you
And
just
we're
live there
rolling
now?
No, I'm from Troy.
I was born there too.
Were
I
you
was born
really?
on Liberty Street.
Oh, yeah?
Way back, and then I moved up to 101st Street. You know La Pasta's grocery store?
Oh, yeah,
That's my
yeah,
grandmother
yeah.
and grandfather.
Oh,
started
really?
that. Yeah, it's still going. So yeah.
Yeah, Troy used to be a great place, I thought. When you were when I was a kid, you could play on the streets without any worry and so forth. And I grew up on that horrible street now, 9th Street.
Oh,
You've heard?
9th,
Oh,
yeah.
gosh, that's terrible.
I know.
But back then it was wonderful.
Yeah. Well, 8th, just one street down,
Yeah.
is where Kate Mullaney was.
Yeah, right.
The union leader.
Just the
Yeah.
second house in, was it,
Yeah.
from Hoosick and
Yeah.
8th?
My
Yep,
mother lived up on 15th Street,
Oh,
16th Street, off of Hoosick.
I see.
Yeah, that was her last house. That's a great town. I still love it. The history there is amazing.
Oh, it'll come back,
It
I
will,
think.
it will. Anyway, so we were talking about the major issues. I guess you've touched on a lot of them. If there's any that you haven't, this is the time to.
No, I think our major problems that we tried to solve in research involve the salaries and fringe benefits of state employees. You know, you're talking about supporting information for health insurance, for work week, paid time off. I said salaries, I guess. And all the different kinds of leaves, sick leave, annual leave, which is vacation, and some working conditions in some of the facilities were not the best. Now, I don't want to leave the impression that we solved those. What we did was try to gather information to give it either to the field rep or a local president or what have you, you know, to use. And in some instances, we did have to go and participate. But it was a general, broad area, and as I keep saying, I guess that's what makes the job so interesting. You're involved in so many different things, sometimes new things you never were involved in before or even heard of come to light, and it makes it even more interesting. You find out about that, and you look into it, and you know, get information. We got information from other states, California, Michigan, Florida, Ohio, Texas, Illinois, and so forth, to use in comparing with New York State to argue some of the benefits. Of course, the employers only go to say you pick the favorable ones for you, you know, and they'd come up with a list and show us ones that were in favor of them, and used to say, hey, we're not running an election here. Let's just talk about what the situation is as best we can, you know, throughout the country. So those things were all interesting, and that's primarily what the involvement was. Mine was, you know, somewhat narrow in a way because it didn't involve all the political stuff, and it didn't involve, you know, a lot of the other representations that the employees needed. Meetings with their employer because they thought they were treated wrongly or charges were brought up against them for some action or whatever, were taken care of either by the field staff or now field staff with attorneys, you know. So that was the limitation pretty much on the type of thing we did.
But you would find out about working conditions in other places and compare that to here, and then
Oh, yeah,
safety
right.
issues.
Sure, we'd send out questionnaires with a long explanation and offer the other jurisdictions a copy of the results. That usually was the key to getting an answer. You know, they didn't have to do anything if they didn't want to. And we send them a copy of the results, but yeah, we did all kinds of analyses of different situations in different jurisdictions, and the important thing is you have to make sure you're talking about apples and apples.
Now, Steve told me that in the 50s and 60s, he told me to ask this question, CSEA started to use advertising and PR to get its message across. Now, your input helped that effort. I mean, you gave ammunition for people for the PR people and the advertising people to help change public opinion. What kind of stuff did you do?
Probably, if I recall, what we did was similar to what I just told you. You know, there's a lot of public employees who have relatives. If you count them all, you're probably in New York State talking 1 million plus or more, maybe more than that. And the idea was to not only convince the state employees and perhaps an employer here or there, but to get the public on your side as much as possible. And this is a little out of my area because it's more Steve's and the people we had back then. But we used to develop information to try to make everything look good. You know, the state employees were doing this for you, doing that for you, and so forth. And here's the measly little amount they're getting paid for doing it. And everybody thinks, well, they don't work at all they do is sit around at a desk and they got all kinds of time off. Well, you try to disprove those things, you know. And we provided information that could be used by what used to be called Public Relations Department, Communications, to do so.
It hasn't changed much then. We're still trying to tell the same
Yeah, I
story.
think so.
Now, you were there when you were at 8 Elk Street, so you saw the transition to 33 Elk.
Right.
And then to here,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
Tell us about just the workings of that. I mean, that must have been like a zoo.
What wasn't? No, really. 8 Elk was very, very small. I mean, there was hardly anything you could do to hold a meeting or whatever. You know, there was a room off that one bedroom we had for research that was called a library. It was a little bigger room. It had a meeting table and then different offices on the 2 stories below it. But again, very small, not very many offices. So it just started to grow and grow and grow, and we had to get out of there. So we built the building at 33 Elk. And that at the time was sufficient to handle everything. As a matter of fact, they thought they were going to be able to rent the 3rd floor out.
Now, what year was that?
Pardon me?
33 Elk. When did you move there?
Oh, golly.
Right around the Taylor Law time, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I had to go and look at the cornerstone, to be honest.
That's right. 67, like I said, something.
Yeah, and then we were there for a few years.
You didn't rent the 3rd floor out?
No, we didn't rent the 3rd floor out. It got filled very quickly with different committees and people and offices and staff. And then this building, of course, is the old teachers' retirement building. And this one right here. And that was for sale. They built a new one out of Corporate Woods. And they looked into it and figured that this would be sufficient for a few years anyway. And so they bought this building. And this was much more pleasant. I mean, you could, of course, there was no air conditioning at 8 Elk. In the summertime, just, you know, melted in the pot. And in 33 Elk, there was air, was better working conditions. And here, of course, there's air. So in the summertime, it's not bad. Parking was a problem. Here, they had to buy the lot next door for parking because it didn't take long to fill a small parking lot. So I would say right now, and I can't speak for the last 9 years that I've been retired, but it seems a lot more sufficient for the operation than the other 2 did. It's all a matter of the growing process.
Right. Any other people or issues that you remember that you want to talk about? I know we pretty much picked your brain about the...
I got an interesting little story to inject a little bit of humor that I got a kick out of. When I said we used to talk to the state over in the governor's conference room, you know, representing state employees. And, I made a presentation one time on salaries, and I figured, heck, I didn't get my education for no reason. I better use a little statistical analysis here. And actually, it wasn't anything more than kids get today in high school. I was talking about salaries, mean, median, mode, standard deviation, and all that kind of stuff. And I made the presentation. And on their side, they had one of the characters was an attorney named Howard Rubenstein. And he made lots of presentations for them, but nothing statistical and so forth. So when I got done with the presentation, since he was their spokesman, one of the state, I think it may have been Dr. Hurd, said, "Howard, did you get that?" And Howard says, "I don't know what the hell he's talking about." That was one of my personal, laughs in the job. I enjoyed that immensely, when you can get something over an attorney who doesn't know what you're talking about. So.
And get him to admit it.
Yeah, get him to admit it. You're right. That's almost impossible.
That's a good story. All right, I've got a couple more questions and then we'll let you go, but
Okay.
We could spend another hour with these questions, I think. What are you most proud of in your CSEA career?
Well, there probably could be several things. A lot of it involved, the types of information we provided for our negotiations, the analysis, so to speak, whether it be salary or fringe benefit or what have you. I think we represented ourselves well. And one thing I didn't mention is a reclassification reallocation process. Now, this means reclassification means changing a job title in a different job, putting it in a different job class so that it more represented the duties being performed by incumbents. In other words, you don't have a cook working as a clerk. And if they're working as a cook, then you reclassify them to cook. You got to get the information, the arguments, and so forth. And the same thing with salaries. I mean, again, outside of the salary negotiations, you go back and let's say you've got a group of people in a given title and they seem very low compared to other public jurisdictions. They just take that title, right to the other public jurisdictions, or if you could, visit them, find out what they have. It may not be a comparable title, but a similar job, by comparing the duties of the job and responsibilities, and then what salary did they pay. So that was the reallocation, change in salary grade. Reclassification was change in title to more adequately describe what the job is. So we got involved in those at the state level and had presentations to the Division of Classification and Compensation in the State Civil Service Department, who had the responsibilities for granting or disapproving those. And that involved writing briefs, submitting them to them, and if the director felt that there had to be a hearing, they had a hearing, and we usually would pick a couple of employees from the group we're talking about, title, and go with them, make the presentation for them. And, the civil service appreciated you had an employee there, because if they think we were telling them something that wasn't true, then they'd ask them, but that usually didn't happen. And then if the Director of Classification and Compensation denied the application or the appeal, you appealed it to the State Civil Service Commission. And you did the same kind of representation there. You wrote a brief indicating why the Director of Class and Comp was wrong, why we think it's like a legal process, practically. So that was very interesting. I participated in a lot of that. And one of the biggest satisfactions, back then we had about 30,000 what were called mental hygiene attendants. Of course, since then, a lot of the facilities have closed down. But they fought for years to get reallocated, higher salary grade. So I think by the time we left, we had them got them reclassified, not all at once, but to a psychiatric attendant at grade 7. They were grade 4. And for 30,000 people, a 3-grade jump was, pretty good and costly to the state. So that was a big satisfaction.
Any others?
Well, let's see. Probably could think of 10 of them after I leave.
Well, if I ask you another question and you remember
Sure,
something
go
else,
ahead.
just jump back to it. Because the next question on my list here is, it's the opposite, what are you most disappointed by in your career at CSEA?
Oh, I suppose, if you're talking about from the point of view of CSEA, working for CSEA, not too much. I was generally pretty satisfied. The only thing that would get you once in a while is when you get backed into a corner by a group at a delegate meeting. Now, they have departmental delegate meetings, mental hygiene here, motor vehicles here, and so forth. And each staff person was assigned to one of those meetings. Well, I can remember I got stuck with mental hygiene more often than not, and that was the biggest meeting. And we used to have somebody on the board of directors who was the mental hygiene representative on the board and who presided usually at those meetings. Well, a couple of times she says to me, Bill, I can't do it. I said, I don't feel well. Will you do it? And we're to walk in the door. I mean, the meeting's about to start. I didn't have any choice. I had to do it, you know. So it went fine for a couple of meetings, and the third time it got pulled, and I was presiding. Some guy gets up and he says, who the hell are you? You're only staff. What do you mean you have no right to be up there, you know, running this meeting and so forth? I said, that's fine with me, sir. If you'd like to come up and take my place, feel free. Well, that quieted him down, but I mean, that was one, you know, you get a little scary. You're talking mental hygiene delegates, probably 200-300 people. And you just wonder, is it going to be the start of something, you know, that's going to cause a big problem? But luckily it didn't. That was, you know, the kind of disappointing thing. And of course you got, I'm not talking now about CSEA, but some of those presentations to civil service and the state commission and so forth on job titles or reclassification, reallocation. You could really believe it. You knew that what you were saying was absolutely right, and it'd get turned down. And you find out later, you know, a few years later, we turned it down because we didn't have the money at the time to do it, pay for it. And, you know, that just, you felt, wow, what the hell's the use? But you could never give up, and generally speaking, overall, it worked out.
All right, and we may have touched on this, but the question's here, so I might as well ask it.
Hold on just a second
Oh,
here.
okay. Oh, hi.
Not to me.
No, come on in.
Okay, do you
Good
wish
time.
to- Oh, it's nice and cool out here.
Oh, yeah?
Here, I'm gonna
Yeah,
stop
well,
tape
there's not
for
much in
updates.
here.
Want me to ask the rest I've got and then see what?
I don't have any questions.
Okay.
Okay, we're rolling.
All right, we're rolling again. All right, I mean, we may have covered this in another way, but let me ask the question this way. What do you see as the most important events during your time of involvement with CSEA?
Well, I think the most important event was the Taylor Law. And I say that because it, as I mentioned before, formalized and granted certain rights to public employees in New York State that they didn't have before. And it made the unions, gave them a place, a recognized place, you know, so that they were more like the private sector unions. The disappointing part of it is there's no binding arbitration, and that's a problem. There is, the parties can agree to go to arbitration. You can even get a member of PERB or one of their staff to arbitrate a matter or situation, but it's not binding. I mean, if both sides agree to accept it, fine. If they don't, too bad. There's no further step. That's it. So that's quite disappointing, and I would hope sometime that would get amended to provide for binding arbitration.
Do you see it happening?
Well, it's been a number of years now, and it hasn't happened. Yeah, I think I do. I think that they're going to realize sometime that, looking at the record, that the unions haven't been outlandish in their demands or way out in left field, and that generally, you know, they can work with the unions, that they're agreeable to compromise and so forth, and that, hey, why not let an arbitrator in such cases make a recommendation that we'll both abide by. I don't know how long it'll be, but I think it's down the road someplace.
Probably need another Rockefeller as governor.
Maybe, maybe.
All right, let's look to the, well, how history is, you know, what did Shakespeare say? The past, what's past is prologue. What lessons does CSEA's history hold for its future?
Well, I think that if it looks back and looks at the progress that was made all the way through those years, then you take it step by step and expand on a lot of the things that happened, we can probably get to represent probably most employees in the state. And I would, all due respect to AFSCME, there might be a place where we could move out of state too. Who knows? You know, we might even go up to Alaska, right? I don't know if AFSCME's already there. They may be. So they're there. So we'll get the Eskimos. They get the rest of the population. Or Hawaii, yeah.
Well, what do you think of the, speaking of the future, legislature and representing more people. What do you think of this move of the recent past to represent non-government employees?
Well, I think there's room for that. I think that there's a lot of non-government employees that are in jobs that are so related to government jobs that public employee unions can better represent them than the private sector. I think that's the way it's developing and the way it will continue to develop.
I just heard on the PBS this morning on the way in here that the research has proven that there are at least 30% of American people, families, are making twice what the government says is poverty level, but can't afford the basics. $28,000 a year is what it now takes to cover the basics, and 30% of Americans don't make it. So, what's the answer?
Well, it depends on what the composition of the 30% is. I mean, where do they work? What kind of skills do they have? Probably none of them, or not too many of them, have any kind of formal representation with their employers, which they need. And there's always going to be some. I don't see how it could be eliminated, but I think it can be a lot better than 28 or 30%, a lot lower. And I think that will happen with a little more push by the unions. Of course, you got a problem. Sorry about the squeal. You got a problem that today there seems to be a trend that supports the employer, not necessarily in the public sector, but more so in the private sector now, where the employer has more control, can tell the union, no, we're not going to do this, we'll backfill, we'll hire employees if they go on strike, we may not hire them back afterwards, and so forth. Well, we've gone through periods of time where they, if I can use the expression, wouldn't dare do that because of the outcome. Well, today something is changing with respect to the employees, because if I can say it this way, they're letting them get away with it. And I think that's a weakness somewhere, and that they shouldn't be able to get away with it. Why should they? What's the value in having a legal provision for a strike? I mean, if I'm an employer and I can backfill your job if you go on strike, what do you gain? I mean, where's the power of the gathered group of employees in the union to get anything from the employer because of the right to strike? To me, it's gone in that respect. And that's got to change. I think it can change back.
You still keep up with CSEA news?
Well, I still get the CSEA newspaper
Yeah.
and read it every time I get it. And of course, Don Kelly, he's my son-in-law, so we talk about a lot of things. Most of them, some problems about what do we do in this county, not too much though, just a little bit.
So from where you started to where the union is now, what's your overall impression of CSEA?
Well, and I'm not saying that because I work for them, but I think CSEA has done a hell of a job, a good job in not only getting membership but in representing them. And you got to take into consideration the staff member ratio. I mean, for the number of members there are per staff member in any given area, like the field staff, and representing them at the workplace and so forth, for the number that we have, I think that they've progressed a lot, an awful lot, and I think it probably will continue to progress a lot. And I would say that CSEA, in my mind, has done a very good job, and that they hopefully will continue to do it in the future. Of course, it depends on the foresight of the leadership and so forth. One of the hardest things probably with CSEA to work with is such a large board of directors. And you got over 100 people running an organization. Heck, what is it, IBM has 12? Or something like that. It's hard to get a meeting of the minds, and that takes a lot of effort too. And of course, a lot of that governs what CSEA does.
Well, personally, I think a lot of the success of now, it has a lot to do with the beginnings and your participation and people from back then. And people dedicated to their work, and you certainly were, and appreciate it. Is there anything else you want to say?
Well, thank you. No, you got to remember, out of it for 9 years. So there's probably a lot of things I could talk about if I was still working here that I don't know about, you know. I try to keep up on some things, but you can't. It's that important to.
All right, we're mostly history project here, so
Yeah,
we're
I
talking
guess so.
the past. I just wanted to know a little bit about what you think is going on now, but is any stuff from the past you haven't, that's gone through your mind that you want to tell us about? Now's the time.
Well,
People, places, things.
How about changes in technology, certainly in terms of the work that you do?
Oh, computers.
The advent of computers.
Oh,
it
yeah.
Must have really
Yeah.
changed your ability
That's
to
a
represent.
good point.
That's a
What
good
was it like
point.
then and now, yeah.
it did. We just started having computers up in the research department when I left. We had them for about a year or two. And it made the comparisons a lot easier. It made getting information from different places a lot easier. Saved a lot of time. And you could manipulate figures and do things that you couldn't do before. So, yes, that's a big step in progress. And it's continuing. Right, Ed?
Yep. I remember the spreadsheets, the green spreadsheets.
Oh, yeah, you
With
sit-
the pencil, but he was a very neat printer. You could read his numbers better than anybody else's in the
You
department.
just, I think back of the time it took to
Yeah.
do that
Yeah.
compared to now the printout you can get with a computer.
Yep, amazing.
Was it all hand done then? I mean,
It was then. You had a little calculator, a little desk calculator, that's all. But those were the times. You made do with what you had. As a matter of fact, we didn't even know there was going to be such things as these desktop computers back then.
anything?
That's great. I mean, I don't
We
remember,
covered
I
a
don't
lot.
know- I wasn't here for what
Oh,
you
we
asked.
covered a lot of ground.
Mhm.
I think we're,
Comp worth.
No, I didn't mention that.
Oh, what?
That came from.
You trying to hang me? Which side are?
tell it from your point of
No,
view.
that was another thing that I didn't mention. The state adopted a program of comparable worth. And probably the only information that we gathered on comp worth, we knew where it was and why. But probably the important thing that we tried to do was to determine why it should be a program in cases where it is. In other words, if you had, let me give you an example. State civil service law required that the appointing authority could make an appointment from one of the top 3 people, successful candidates on a civil service eligible list. They could take any one. They could take the 3rd if they wanted to. Well, comp worth comes into the picture and they start saying, well, you got to give some preference to a minority. Now, I'm not saying that that was illegal, but I mean, if there was a minority, let's say in the top 3, give preference to the minority. And we just got requests many times to find out if that person or persons were as well qualified. And that was about the extent we had with comp worth. Because our position, at least I think CSEA's position was, if you got equal qualified candidates, it shouldn't make any difference. No. And civil service did a lot of things to get around the rule of 3. Oh, they were using grouped scores and so forth, and this is group 1, this is group 2, this is group 3. Now we can make an appointment from anyone in the 3 groups, and the total in the 3 groups might be 100, 120. You know, and you had to fight that kind of stuff and say it wasn't legal, wasn't what was intended by the civil service law. And that's about it. I think we've been.
Now, there's a quote that I just remembered. I think it's Mark Twain. He said, there's damn lies and statistics. What do you think?
Well, I think statistics are part of the lies and damn lies.
They're not words.
No, I think that statistics, it depends on the person's definition. I mean, if people call statistics just a compilation of numbers, you know, counting this number of people here in this category and so forth, that's not it. It's more, like I said, getting more technical, you know, like in the polls, where they say there's a chance for plus or minus 3% error and probability of this happening and that happening. I think there's a lot to statistics that of course, Mark Twain never knew about. But secondly, that you can't categorize it in the same breath with lies and so forth, because you can do a lot with statistics to show what you want. It depends on how you analyze the data. But it's not really lying because the information is there in numbers. And you just manipulate it to do using a various statistical formulae or whatever, or procedure, hoping that it comes out the way you want it. If it doesn't, you have to admit it. So I think statistics is very valuable, but people got to remember it's not counting the number of people that have licenses in New York State.
Very good. Good, anybody got anything?
I was wondering, I mean, over your tenure, you have seen a number of presidents of CSEA come and go, and each of those individuals bring their own brand of leadership, their own agendas. Any anecdotes, any thoughts of some of those individuals and how they helped CSEA become what it is now?
Well, there were some of them that, had everybody else doing the representation and the work and talking to people, and reserved. Well, you got to remember too, I said, like, Joe Feely was part-time. There were things that came up that couldn't wait for him to get here. And if he could break away, that was fine. So he had to delegate a lot of authority and a lot of things to people that were available. Back a ways, in my era, so to speak, there was a lot of talk about, well, CSEA is run by the law firm. Because the law firm, like I mentioned, Graff, White, Conway, and Holt Harris was the one I'm talking about, did participate in almost everything. Of course, they still were ruled by the board of directors, but some of the presidents would let the representative attorney and the law firm, pretty much guide what happened. And I'm not sure that was good, but you got to remember, too, the background of some of the presidents. I mean, some of them, like Joe Feely was, I think, a senior clerk or something like that, or principal clerk in the tax department. Bill McGowan worked on the wards, I guess, in one of the mental institutions. Trying to think of how you could categorize them as. But some of them took more of a leadership role. They had the time to do it, they were interested in doing it, and they had a little better background, to pick these things up. I'm not going to mention every one I had while I was here and put them in categories. I don't think that'd be fair. Some of them aren't around anymore. But it depended on, the time they had available for the job and what kind of a background they had. I think every one of them was willing. The determination was there, no matter whether they participated or didn't. And then they wanted to make sure that they knew what was going on. And even the attorneys would report to them and tell them and make a suggestion and get the president's approval, a lot of times. Now, I guess Ted Wenzel, when he was president, kind of thought there was too much of that, because one of the crackerjack attorneys that we had assigned to us by Graff, White, Conway, Holt Harris, after Harry Albright, was a guy by the name of Jack Rice, John Carter Rice. Has he still got the firm over there with a partner?
Sure.
When it got all over with, he broke out, and the Graff, White, Conway, Holt Harris kind of broke up into separate firms, and he took one of them with him and had his own law firm over on Eagle Street. And but he was, without qualification, I think, say the best individual on his feet in a situation that I've ever met. I mean, he could pull things out of the air and make you believe that all snow was blue and so forth, fast talking. And so that got to the point where Ted felt he was in control too much, and we had a delegate meeting, I think it was at the Palace Theater in Albany, and Rice was up there, and Ted Wenzel fired him right on the spot. Right on the spot. And a lot of people tried to rush up on the stage, they thought that this wasn't appropriate, and a lot of people were behind Ted. And his whole point was, Rice, you got too much to say. And of course, Ted Wenzel was a highly educated person, he was a PhD and so forth. But he had his kind of funny ways too, But I think as far as leadership is concerned, we've had good leadership, no matter where it came from. I hope we will continue to have good leadership. I say we because CSEA is still part of my life. I can't get rid of it, and I don't want to get rid of it. And I think they got a bright future. I could, no, don't record that.
What, the affiliation with AFSCME was a big step for CSEA. I'm
Mhm.
sure that was just as I was coming into AFSCME, and I remember hearing, at least from Washington, that there was a lot of discussion as to whether
Oh,
or
there
not-
was a lot of
Do you want to
discussion.
talk a little bit about that? I
The,
mean,
the affiliation with AFSCME, that really split the membership. Those in favor of it said, well, it's going to be a protection for CSEA. We can get services from AFSCME, and it's going to do us good. It'll make us better union. And we'll have a lot more support. We can even get lobbying done for things in Washington and so forth. And those who were opposed to it were saying, why are we going to pay them all this money? We could spend this money and get more people on our own and do this type of thing. We're paying them just so they won't raid us, and challenge us in an election and so forth. And so those were the two sides as far as I recall. And of course, I don't have to tell you which one won.
Any facts and figures help?
Well, we didn't get too involved in that. That was pretty much political. But I think it worked out. I think it worked out well. We've lost staff to AFSCME even.
that's true.
Yep.
I think Skip would like to end on that note.
This is wonderful.
Make sure you edit right.
He'll do his and we'll do ours. It's great, really.
Good,
A lot of
good.
good stuff there.
Good.
I appreciate it. And if it leads to other questions, maybe we'll come back and get you again.
Let me just, you're done, right?
Well, you get to know me.
Don't ever trust them, Bill.
I never.
That's off the record.
Turn that thing off.